You are seeing signs of inflation starting to rise. We are observing very substantial inflation. It is quite interesting. We are seeing prices go up, and people are accepting these increases. I mean, it's not just in home construction. The cost of having 9 home builders, in addition to our manufactured housing operation, which is the largest in the country, is rising. We really build a lot of homes, and costs are simply increasing. Steel costs are going up every day. They keep rising, and there hasn't been a slowdown because wages are still going up. If you sign a 3-year contract, you have a 3-year contract. But if you're buying steel from General Motors or somewhere, you're paying more every day. So the economy is really heating up, and we didn't expect this. All of our businesses thought we would be able to get back to work or operate normally after several operations closed. We closed furniture stores for weeks or more on average, and we didn't know what would happen when we reopened. We can't stop people from buying things, and we can't deliver them. But they said, well, that's okay because no one else can deliver them either, and we'll wait for 3 months or so while the backlog grows. We thought it would end when payments normalized, but it just kept going and going. I get the numbers every week. I call for information, and we review day by day what happens in 3 different stores: Chicago, Kansas City, and Dallas. And it just doesn't stop. People have money in their pockets and are paying higher prices. When carpet prices go up in 1 or 2 months, they announce a price increase because our costs are going up. Supply chains are all messed up for all kinds of people, but it's almost a buying frenzy. Except in certain areas you can't buy. You really can't buy international airline tickets. And there is a transfer of money from a small part of the economy to the rest. Everyone has more money in their pockets than before. But at the same time, it's a terrible situation for a percentage of people. To better understand, think about the price of a new car. If you used to pay $50,000 for a car, you might now be paying $60,000 or more. This happens because the cost of raw materials used in car manufacturing, like steel and aluminum, has gone up. Additionally, worker wages are also rising, contributing to the final cost of the product. This situation reflects a booming economy, where prices are rising due to high demand and increased production costs. Imagine you are renovating your home and need to buy materials. A few years ago, a roll of wallpaper cost $50. Now you go to the same place and see the price has risen to $80. This increase is not an isolated case. It reflects a broader trend across the economy. Steel costs are going up every day. They keep rising, and there hasn't been a slowdown because wages are still increasing. If you sign a 3-year contract, you have a 3-year contract. But if you're buying steel from General Motors or somewhere, you're paying more each day. So the economy is really heating up, and we didn't expect this. To illustrate, consider the price of a new car. If you used to pay $50,000 for a car, you might now be paying $60,000 or more. This happens because the cost of raw materials used in making cars, such as steel and aluminum, has gone up. Moreover, worker wages are also rising, which contributes to the final cost of the product. This situation reflects a booming economy, where prices are rising due to high demand and increased production costs. All of our businesses thought we would be able to get back to work or operate normally after several operations closed. We closed furniture stores for weeks or more on average, and we didn't know what would happen when we reopened. We can't stop people from buying things, and we can't deliver them. But they said, well, that's okay because no one else can deliver them either, and we'll wait for 3 months or so while the backlog grows. We thought it would end when payments normalized, but it just kept going and going. Imagine you bought a sofa and have been waiting for months to receive it. Many customers are facing this situation because supply chains have been severely affected. It's not just a matter of stock shortages, but also of difficulties in delivery and transportation. If you order a sofa and it arrives months late, it is a direct reflection of supply chain issues and the broader economic impact. I get the numbers every week. I call for information, and we review day by day what happens in 3 different stores: Chicago, Kansas City, and Dallas. And it just doesn't stop. People have money in their pockets and are paying higher prices. When carpet prices go up in 1 or 2 months, they announce a price increase because our costs are rising. Here, what we're seeing is a feedback loop. As production costs rise, companies pass these increases on to consumers. This results in higher prices for items like carpets, furniture, and even food. And paradoxically, the higher prices go, the more people are willing to pay, which further fuels inflation. Supply chains are all messed up for all kinds of people, but it's almost a buying frenzy. Except in certain areas you can't buy. You really can't buy international airline tickets. And there is a transfer of money from a small part of the economy to the rest. Everyone has more money in their pockets than before, but at the same time, it's a terrible situation for a percentage of people. To illustrate, consider international air travel. If you try to book a flight to another country, you might find that prices are extremely high or that there is no availability. This occurs because, while some sectors face shortages and rising prices, others, like tourism, are still recovering and struggling to meet demand. This leads to a redistribution of money within the economy, where some sectors are thriving while others are still struggling to get back to normal. This scenario creates an economic environment where there is both a sense of prosperity and difficulty, depending on the sector and individual perspective. For some people, rising prices and inflation can be a source of stress and financial hardship, while others might not feel the immediate impact as much. You know this suit? I haven't worn a suit for almost a year, and that means the dry cleaner went out of business. No one is bringing suits in for dry cleaning, and no one is bringing in white shirts. The place where my wife goes, the small business, if it didn't have delivery and pickup services for restaurants, was hurt. On the other hand, if you have pickup facilities, you did well. Sales at the same Queen stores increased significantly, and they adapted. But it's not a price-sensitive economy in any way. I don't know exactly how this appears in different price indexes, but there is more inflation happening than most anticipated just 6 months ago. To illustrate, consider how the pandemic affected local businesses. Many small business owners, such as dry cleaners and restaurants, faced extreme difficulties because their customers simply couldn't or didn't want to leave their homes. The demand for services like dry cleaning fell drastically because, with fewer people going to the office and wearing suits, no one was bringing clothes to be cleaned. This led many businesses to close their doors because they couldn't adapt quickly to the new conditions. On the other hand, businesses that managed to adapt, like those offering delivery and pickup services, thrived. For example, if a restaurant quickly adjusted to offer deliveries instead of in-person dining, it likely saw an increase in sales during the pandemic. This kind of adaptation was crucial for the survival and success of businesses in times of crisis. The inflation we are seeing now is a reflection of the rapid economic changes and the adaptations that consumers and businesses had to make. It's not a price-sensitive economy at all, which means prices are rising, but not necessarily in a uniform or predictable manner. There's a very smart person who thinks it's dangerous. This is just the beginning. Inflation will affect you. It's certain that we will have inflation over time, and we are following policies in this country that stimulate businesses and will inevitably have some inflationary consequences. And as we borrow money from the rest of the world, it would be very human of future politicians to decide that they would prefer to repay the rest of the world with dollars that are worth much less than the dollars they borrowed. It's the classic way to reduce the impact and cost of external debt, and we are accumulating a lot of external debt. Imagine you borrow money from a friend and promise to pay it back in a year. If inflation increases, the real value of the money you repay will be less than the value you borrowed. This means that in real terms, you are paying less than the amount you originally received. It's a strategy used by governments to reduce the burden of external debt, but it can have significant side effects, such as the loss of purchasing power. I find it interesting when politicians talk about using taxpayer money to do this and that and how taxpayers are paying. At AIG, we did not increase taxes in any way. In this country, taxpayers are not paying anything more than they did a few years ago. In fact, federal revenues this year were close to $2.6 trillion a few years ago, maybe more like $2.7 trillion. So we are taking less money from taxpayers. This can be compared to a situation where a government does not raise taxes, but still covers the cost of public services and debt in other ways. For example, the government may not directly increase taxes, but might issue more debt or create more money, leading to currency devaluation and consequently inflation. The people who are really paying for the things we are doing now are probably those investing in fixed dollar investments, much of it from the government, and will find that their purchasing power when redeeming investments will be much lower. So, you could say that AIG bonuses are probably being paid mainly by the Chinese in terms of the loss of purchasing power they will experience with their holdings in government bonds. To simplify, if you invest in government bonds and inflation rises, the real value of those bonds decreases. Therefore, even if the nominal value of the bond remains the same, what you can buy with that money is less. Thus, investors, including countries like China, that hold large amounts of U.S. government bonds, may experience a reduction in the value of their investments. But I am more inclined to say that taxpayers are paying than to say that the Chinese are paying. It's an interesting situation. I read that comment every day about how taxpayers are doing this and that, and my taxes have not been increased. Your taxes haven't been increased. They'll give me back $250 here soon. Taxpayers haven't paid anything so far, and my guess is that the final cost of much of this will be paid by a reduction in the real value of fixed dollar investments in the future. And that will be the easiest thing to do. And if it's the easiest thing to do, it's the most likely to happen. So you will see a lot of inflation. What happens is that instead of raising taxes, the government may choose to reduce the real value of debt through inflation. This means that, while taxes remain the same, the real cost of fixed investments and savings may be reduced due to rising inflation. Ultimately, the cost may be borne indirectly by investors and debt holders rather than directly by taxpayers. Thus, inflation becomes a tool to ease the debt burden, but can also have a significant impact on investments and people's purchasing power. Now, the best protection against inflation is your own earning power. If you are the best teacher, if you are the best surgeon, if you are the best lawyer, you will command a share of the goods and services produced by others. It doesn't matter what the currency is, whether it's shells, hikes, marks, or dollars. So your own earning power is by far the best. If you are the best journalist, whatever it may be, you will get your share of the national economic pie, regardless of what the currency's value may be measured against some previous standard. To understand this better, imagine you are a highly skilled surgeon. Regardless of how the local currency appreciates or depreciates, you continue to receive a significant compensation for your work. Your skill and expertise are key to securing a share of economic resources, as there is a constant and high demand for highly qualified professionals. If you are the best in your field, inflation will have less impact on you because your earning power and ability to maintain a good income are not directly affected by currency fluctuations. The second best protection is owning a wonderful business. If you own the Coca-Cola brand, you will continue to get a share of people's work for your product for 20 years and 50 years, and it doesn't matter what happened to the general price level, because people will give up 3 minutes of work, whatever it is, to enjoy 12 ounces of a product they like. So these are the great assets. Your own earning power first, and then the earning power of a wonderful business that doesn't require heavy capital investment. If it requires heavy capital investment, you will be harmed by inflation. To illustrate, think about Coca-Cola. The brand has immense strength in the market. Regardless of how prices increase, people will still continue to buy soft drinks. The brand value and the ongoing demand for the product provide protection against inflation. If you invest in a solid company with a strong brand that doesn't rely on heavy capital investments, you will be better protected against inflation. Companies like Coca-Cola have an advantage because their brand is recognized and appreciated globally, ensuring constant demand. With these guidelines, I would say the best thing to do is to invest in yourself. Yes, the young person should become a neurosurgeon and invest in Coca-Cola rather than government bonds if you discount and consider the current interest rates, which are very cheap. The question is what interest rates will do over time. There is a view of what interest rates will be based on the yield curve up to 30 years. So, we are in a fascinating time. We have never really seen the impact of injecting money into the base we are doing, with expansive fiscal policy while keeping monetary policy close to zero interest rates. It's extremely interesting. For a young person, investing in education and skills can be one of the best decisions. By becoming an expert in a high-demand field like neurosurgery, you are essentially ensuring a high earning potential in the future. Compared to more traditional investments like government bonds, which may currently seem cheap, The return on investment in skills and knowledge can be much greater in the long run. The current interest rates and economic policies are creating a complex and uncertain economic scenario. The combination of expansive fiscal policy and near-zero interest rates is shaping the economy in ways we have never seen before, creating an opportunity for those who are well-positioned. But in economics, there's always something to remember. You can never do one thing and expect the results to be simple. We are sending huge amounts of money. The president said this on Wednesday. 85% of people will receive a $1,000 check. A few years ago, we were saying that 40% of people could never get $1,000 in cash. Now we have 85% of people receiving these sums, and so far, we haven't had any unpleasant consequences from it. I mean, people feel better, people want the money and feel good. However, the people who are lending the money are not feeling as good. But this makes stocks go up, makes businesses prosper, and keeps the electorate happy. We'll see if this causes anything else. If it doesn't cause anything else, you can count on it continuing in a very big way. But there are consequences for everything in the economy. To illustrate, think about the stimulus checks that many people recently received. Initially, these payments provide financial relief and improve people's well-being. But the overall effect on the economy is more complex. The increase in consumption can boost economic growth in the short term, but it can also lead to consequences such as inflation and increased debt. People feel good with the extra money, but there's a cost for those lending money to the government and for the overall balance of the economy. Current economic policies may have a significant impact in the future, and it's essential to be aware that every economic action can have side effects, and that results may be more complicated than they appear at first glance. That's why companies like Google and Apple, which we don't own, are incredible in terms of return on capital. They don't require much capital and generate a lot of money. If you're trying to find bonds that yield more than government bonds, we have $100 billion in bonds that generate about $30 to $40 million per year, depending on short-term rates. This creates the pressure that monetary authorities want. They are pressing the economy. And in Europe, they do it even more extremely. We are helping with fiscal policy. People feel good and have become insensitive to trillion-dollar figures. Trillions mean nothing to anyone, but $1,000 means something to them. We'll see where all this leads. But to me, it's the most interesting economic movie we've ever seen. Professional economists were very surprised by what happened. I remember what Churchill said about Clement Attlee. He was a very modest man and had much to be modest about. That's exactly what happened with professional economists. They were so confident about everything and found that the world is more complicated than they thought. Keynes said many years ago that inflation is an invisible tax that only one person in a million really understands. It's a tax on people who had faith in the currency issued by the government. The best protection and investment against inflation is improving your own earning power and talents. Very few people maximize their talents. If you enhance your talents, they cannot be taxed. Whether you're a lawyer, journalist, or any other professional, that is the best protection against a currency that may depreciate rapidly. The best passive investment, I think, is a good business. If you own a stake in a good business, it's very likely to retain purchasing power no matter what happens with the currency. But it's interesting that in the United States, the value of the dollar has fallen by 94% since I was born, to 6 cents. So inflation is a very cruel tax on people who believe in fixed dollars. However, things can work well even in times of inflation. I mean, if someone had told me when I was born that a dollar bill would drop to 6 cents, I might have said, let me go back. I'm not interested in living in such a world. But in reality, it worked out very well. So I have no complaints. Investing in yourself is the best thing you can do. Anything that enhances your talents, no one can take that away from you. They can accumulate huge deficits, and the dollar can become much less valuable. But if you have talents and maximize those talents, you have an incredible asset. This doesn't mean everyone should go to college, but it does mean that any way you find to improve your communication skills is extremely important. I took the Dale Carnegie course, which I paid for as if it were a college degree, and it was worth it. I advise students to look for the work they would do if they didn't need a job. Don't go through life dreaming that everything will be great. You really want to be doing what you love. And you can't necessarily find that in your first job, but don't give up before you find it. You will make mistakes in life, there's no doubt about that. You don't want to make them in major decisions, like who you marry. In terms of business and investments, you can't avoid making some mistakes. I try to minimize them. I don't dwell on mistakes, nor do I look back. The biggest mistakes are the ones that actually don't show up. They are the mistakes of omission rather than commission. We have never lost so much money on any specific investment, but there have been opportunities I knew enough to take advantage of and didn't. We lost profits that could have been billions of dollars on things I knew enough to do and didn't. Now, the fact that I didn't buy Microsoft in the past is not a missed opportunity, as I didn't know enough to make that decision. But there were other investments where I knew enough to make the decision and for one reason or another, didn't or did so on a small scale. I was overthinking when I should have been writing checks. These mistakes don't show up anywhere, but I missed some big opportunities. Success in life is partially success because you know not everything will be a success. Never obsess over mistakes. I know many people who agonize over them, and it's simply not worth it. I mean, tomorrow is another day. You move on and move to the next thing. The nature of what I do means that I need to think quite independently, because if I only follow conventional research, I'll do what everyone else is doing, which is generally not very useful in investments. So I need to have an environment and personal temperament that allows me to think for myself. I have an amazing partner, a guy named Charlie Munger. You can't find anyone smarter, with better qualities in anything. We think very similarly and talk about things, but not very often because I know how he thinks and he knows how I think. He has taught me a lot, so if I need to assemble a cabinet to make decisions, I probably shouldn't be running the place. I don't mind having the responsibility, but I just don't want to subject it to a vote because I've seen many cases, particularly in the world of investments, whereas you have larger and larger groups making decisions, they become increasingly homogeneous. I don't think you'll get brilliant investment decisions from a large committee. I always see IQ and talent as representing engine power, but in terms of output, the efficiency with which the engine works depends on rationality. Many people start with 400 horsepower engines and end up getting only 100 horsepower of output. It's much better to have a 200 horsepower engine and get all the output you can. So why do smart people do things that really interfere with getting the output they deserve? It comes down to habits, character, and temperament, and it really boils down to behaving rationally and not getting flustered. As I said, everyone here has the absolute capacity to do anything I do and much more. Some of you will succeed and others won't. Those who don't will be, because they will get flustered, not because the world doesn't allow it. It will be because you won't allow yourselves. You should associate with people who are the kind of people you would like to be. You will move in that direction. The most important person in this regard is your spouse. I can't emphasize how important this is. The friends you have will shape you as you go through life. Make good friends and keep them for the rest of your life, but make sure they are people you admire as well as like. I have an old-fashioned belief that I should only expect to make money from things I understand. And when I say understand, I don't mean understanding what the product does or anything like that. I mean understanding what the business's economics are likely to look like in 10 or 20 years. For example, I know generally what Wrigley, the gum manufacturer, will look like in 10 years. The internet isn't going to change the way people chew gum or which gums they chew. If you own the gum market in a big way and have brands like Double Mint, Spearmint, and Juicy Fruit, those brands will be around in 10 years. So I can't say exactly what the numbers at Wrigley will be, but I won't be far off if I try to look at the future in something like that. Evaluating a company falls within what I call my circle of competence. I understand what they do. I understand the economics of it. I understand the competitive aspects of the business. Therefore, understanding the economic consequences of a business is different from predicting whether an industry is going to do wonderfully. When I look at internet businesses or technology businesses, I say they are marvelous things, and I love playing on the computer. Now I order my books from Amazon and do all these things, but I don't know who is going to win. Unless I know who is going to win, I'm not interested in investing. I'll just play on the computer. Defining your circle of competence is the most important aspect of investing. It's not how big your circle is. You don't need to be an expert in everything, but knowing where the perimeter of that circle is, what you know and what you don't know, and staying within it is the most important. Tom Watson Sr., who started IBM, said in his book that he wasn't a genius, but he was smart in some areas and stayed around those areas. And that's the secret. If I understand a few things and stay in that area, I'll do well. If I don't understand something but get excited about it because my neighbors are talking about it and the stocks are going up and I start dabbling elsewhere, I'll eventually get crushed, and I deserve it. I met Bob Woodward when he had just released All the President's Men. At 30, he was getting quite rich. We had breakfast at the Madison Hotel, and he asked me what he should do with his money. I said that investing is just assigning yourself the right story. Imagine if Ben Bradley told you this morning what the value of the Washington Post company is. What would you do? You'd have to write the story in a month. You'd go out interviewing TV brokers, newspaper brokers, and owners and try to assess each asset. That's what I do. I assign myself the right story, and it's no more than that. Some stories I can't write. If you ask me to write a story about the value of a glamorous but unprofitable business, I don't know how to write that story. But if you ask me to write a story about the value of Potomac Electric Power or something like that, I can write that story. That's what I do every day. It's been my painting for 50-odd years. I can paint what I want. I don't have to follow what Wall Street is telling me to do in the next quarter or anything like that. So, I own the brush, I own the canvas, and the canvas is unlimited. It's a very good game, and I can do it every day with people I like. I don't have to associate with anyone I dislike. I've said many times that if you reach 65 or 70 years old and beyond, and the people you want to love you really love you, you're a success. I've never seen anyone reach that age, and I'm talking about people who are not in extreme poverty or pain, who have many people who love them and who are unhappy. I've seen some very rich people who at 86 felt unhappy. I've seen many people grow old, and I've never seen anyone at 70 or older who felt good about their children or their life. In all my experience, I've seen many people with a lot of money where it didn't work out in the family. They didn't feel good about their children, or their children didn't feel good about them. But whichever way, they failed at the most important task they had, teaching and maintaining good personal relationships. Sometimes this happens for external reasons, but I really have never met anyone, regardless of their economic circumstances, who felt their life was a failure. I knew a guy who was extremely rich. He put a lot of money in his children's names and didn't want them to have any control over it. Once a year, he would have dinner with them and try to get them to sign their income tax return in blank. Imagine that. With 4 children, none of whom he wanted to trust enough. He would manipulate the children during that dinner, and they knew exactly what was going on. Once a year, he would bribe them in a way to sign the income tax return in blank so he could file it, and they wouldn't know what they had. I've seen this repeatedly when people have succeeded, and I've seen many other cases as well. But success is a failure in business, and I don't think they feel good about life. All long-term capital management is fascinating. I hope most of you are familiar with it, but the story is really interesting. If you take John Meriwether and Eric Rosenfeld, Larry Hillenbrand, Greg Hawkins, Victor Hagen, and the 2 Nobel Prize winners, Merton and Scholes, the 16 of them probably have an average IQ as high as any group of 16 people working together in a business in the country, including at Microsoft or wherever you want to name. There's an incredible amount of intellect in that room. Now combine that with the fact that these 16 individuals had extensive experience in the field they were operating in. It wasn't a group of people who made money selling men's clothing and suddenly entered the securities market. They had, on average, about 350 or 400 years of experience doing exactly what they were doing. And then you add the third factor. Most of them had virtually all their substantial wealth in the business. They had their own money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars involved in the business. Super high intellect, working in a field they knew, and yet they ended up going bankrupt. That, to me, is absolutely fascinating. If I ever write a book, it will be called Why Smart People Do Stupid Things. My partner says it should be autobiographical, but it could be an interesting illustration. These are perfectly decent people. I respect them, and they helped me when I had problems with Solomon. They are not bad in any way, but they risked what they had and needed to gain something they didn't need. That's folly, simply folly. No matter what your IQ is, if you risk something important to you for something that isn't important to you, it just doesn't make sense. I don't care if the odds are 100 to 1 or 1 to 100. If you give me a gun with 1,000,000 chambers and one bullet in one of them and tell me to pull the trigger, I wouldn't do it. You can offer any amount you want, but it doesn't do anything for me on the positive side, and the negative side is pretty clear. So, I'm not interested in that kind of game, and yet people play it financially without thinking much about it. One thing I didn't realize when I left school is how much the ordinary person stands out. It's not because they have an IQ of 200 or anything like that. It's really because of how they behave, the energy they bring, the commitment they have, the quality with which they do things, how they treat people around them, and all sorts of things. You will stand out much more than you could imagine if you have those qualities. One of the things you should do is, whether you like it or not, become very comfortable with oratory, for example. It's a skill that will last 50 or 60 years, and it's a responsibility. If you don't like doing it and feel uncomfortable, it will almost certainly last 50 or 60 years and is a necessary skill. But many of the skills are just human skills. If you can bring out the best in the people around you, that is a rare talent. It doesn't relate to IQ, but rather to your attitude toward the world and other people. It's a talent that, if you work on it early and are truly mindful of it, will pay off greatly. You don't need to outshine others or be smarter than them. You want to bring out the best in them, and that will bring great rewards. Thank you for staying until the end. I'm leaving 2 important videos. Choose one and stay with me a little longer. See you soon.